Everyday injustice. Too many wrongful convictions. Corruption has infected the criminal justice system, leaving too many people helpless, fighting for their lives. Instead of receiving justice, people suffer. Is that why they say justice is blind?
Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Nasser Eledroos. He is a public interest technologist, which we'll ask him about in a minute, focused on racial equity in technology and justice systems. And he's currently working as a policy strategist for Color of Change. And you have an interesting background. You go back to the ACLU of Massachusetts. I was looking at my email to see what I had, and I found an email from 2018 that mentioned you there. So just interesting.
Wow.
So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your background and how you got interested in technology.
Yeah. Well, I got interested in technology, same as I think most people in the late 90s and early 2000s, fun gadgetry, the ways that tech can connect us with other people in our communities around the world. And, that led me into pursuing a career initially in computer science and in software engineering. And, in the time since leading up to my time now at Color of Change, I have had this very exciting and really challenging arc, I think, in terms of jumping out of the software engineering world, entering civil society at the ACLU, joining government, where I worked as a senior technologist for former Suffolk County, then former U.S. Attorney Rachel Rollins for the District of Massachusetts. And then a bit of time in academia, and now here at Color of Change, where I sort of sit between an intersection of tech policy, of criminal justice policy, and also stewarding my own work around how you not only just move policy, but move actual technology and tools in service of people, not necessarily in service of corporations. So I'm all over the place, and I think it's been great to have a practice that is one foot in policy and one foot in actually building technology.
And you got to work with Rachel Rollins on the Massachusetts drug lab scandal. I'm just curious to know how that was and what you learned from that.
Well, if you actually watch the documentary on Netflix, David, I'm in 10 frames of that towards the end of the fourth episode, because actually my start of my career started working on the Massachusetts drug lab scandal at the ACLU. What had happened was the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts had basically come out with this really monumental decision saying that any case that the prosecutors had touched and brought cases against, drug cases against people had to be thrown out from this time frame to this time frame in a series of jurisdictions in Massachusetts, which was, a huge deal at the time, and still remains to be one of the largest mass dismissals of cases due to prosecutorial misconduct in U.S. history. And so I had this nice arc of supporting the prosecutors who were able to deliver that relief, to trying to figure out from inside the system, how do you, with sort of the levers of power, the lens of looking inside the system out into the public, the way a prosecutor's office works with its various apparatuses, where the justice system works with different agencies who have a different chain of custody and a different responsibility to pursuing justice, quote unquote. Trying to solve this riddle of the Massachusetts drug lab scandal, and where a series of decisions, deliberate decisions on the part of prosecutors who very much, in one case, the way this part of the system works is that the prosecutor is not the expert, right, in the drug case, in terms of saying, yes, this case, this charge with this drug is definitely that drug. It requires a chemist usually to certify that. And so when the chemist and the prosecutors have been colluding to invent new crimes deliberately or not deliberately, you suddenly run into this problem of like, how do you identify the scope of harm? So my skills in both like using technology to understand the legal system flipped a little bit, because now I was then using my understanding of the legal system to find new pathways to within the justice system to find new data sets, to find new policies, procedures. It was a monumental piece of work over a number of years, and I think, you know, just tying it back a little bit to my work here at Color of Change is part of this broader, much broader movement of of pro, deciding and deliberately campaigning to elect prosecutors who are treating the whole life of people, including those who have been convicted of crime, as part of justice. Like, how do we attain justice for everybody, not just um, the people who have been accused?
And as we segue toward your current work, you know, one of the interesting things about the drug lab scandal is that in a lot of cases, those were crimes that never actually existed in the first place and only became crimes because of this misconduct.
Yes, yes and no. So the way this happened was that in some instances, people had prior convictions. You know, maybe it was as simple as a marijuana possession charge, right? But the very fact that that existed and then a subsequent case was brought led to an enhanced charge that should not have been brought, right? And that is when you start running into all kinds of issues where the you know, where do you design the line of like trying to undo this level of harm, uh you know, and where does the person, the victim, you know, the accused in this uh tragedy of mag magnanimous proportions, where do they receive justice, right? You know, especially considering, you know, how the discourse has evolved around public health and drug law, around the need for people to be receiving relief, especially, you know, we're talking about initially marijuana, you know, charges here, but many of these drug cases are possession for more than that. People have addictions to opioids and other substances. And so when is that coming into factor when we are trying to seek justice for these people? It has been an ongoing problem ever since it really began, almost I want to say 12 years ago. But, you know, I think there's been over 50,000 cases that got dismissed over that period. So there has been some relief, at least with regards to people's records and their ability to seek jobs and housing and, you know, get some aspects of their life reclaimed.
Yes, and on other shows, we've delved into great detail about some of those collateral consequences, and I still find it mind-boggling. You know, simple convictions can stay with people for a lifetime, and they can have these tremendous consequences that actually make us a good deal less safe in our society. But I do want to get into kind of your current work. So, talk about the Black Tech agenda.
Sure. So the Black Tech agenda was initially pioneered by staff at Color of Change prior to my joining in 2023. And it was centered around this idea that there needs to be a floor. There needs to be a simple, like, you know, obviously it is not simple, but a floor in what public policy around technology that supports and uplifts Black people in the United States even looks like. And that is not just limited to criminal justice policy, although that is a huge part of it, where, you know, we know a lot of how we think about technology is rooted right now in this idea like, oh, it's, you know, microchips, it's the internet, it's social media. But in the United States, there has been a historical pattern of using technology to control and monitor Black communities. And technology doesn't necessarily refer to those things explicitly. It can be something as simple as a lantern that Black people had to carry in New York and other parts of the country during sundown or lantern laws. It can be the data systems, the record keeping systems that slave owners, the people who engaged in the marketplace of transporting and selling slaves. They had very meticulous and very detailed technological methods that we would probably in our day and age would call database systems. They would record management systems. All of these have links to the ways we design and use technology. Police departments nowadays use a lot of DNA samples. You can think of the Golden State Killer case from some years ago that was using non-consensual DNA samples to try and pursue and catch a killer. That, the act of using some type of biometric markers, is itself rooted in a practice of control over another population of people, i.e. slaves. Fingerprinting. There were all kinds of control, measuring cranial sizes and other bodily parts to determine what were the markers of identifying an enslaved person. So, the Black tech agenda is fundamentally rooted in this idea that technology has these origins, and it's trying to design a affirmative vision for what technology can instead be doing, or what technology needs to be policed, or how it needs to be policed in order to create an affirmative vision. So Black people can, Black and brown people writ large, can move throughout the world, are not subject to the horrors and harms of technology, and can really have opportunities to thrive, in our communities. So we have this first version of the Black tech agenda in 2022, and we have this new one that we have just published at the end of last year, which is a little broader in its scope and more broadly encompassing how we think about AI, privacy, and thinking about the ways that people's creativity and agency, both in their workplace or in their artistic place, can be respected and honored.
So let me ask you this, and it's interesting you brought up the Golden State Killer, which was a case that was tried in my backyard. Not literally, obviously, but around where I live. But what do you see as the danger of technology, especially toward people of color, and how this integrates into kind of the color of change work?
Sure. So we have biases, putting aside the technology for a moment. We have inherent biases in how our society function. That's just a fact of life. And those biases exist around economic boundaries, and exist around racial boundaries and gender, and ethnicity. And those biases are then entrenched into the people who design certain technologies to function in certain ways. So if you are trying to use technology to support the practice of police, well, police have had documented historical biases against groups of people, against Black people in the United States. And so there's legitimate questions that are then warranted. Are these technologies repeating or amplifying or mitigating those biases? And so, when we think about biometric data explicitly, like the Golden State Killer case, it becomes there's a series of questions. Who gets consent, who has the right to challenge data that's being used in this way to pursue someone. You can think about facial recognition. I know it's talked about repeatedly, but there have been so many instances across the country, at least 8 that I think I know of, where a wrongful arrest there are wrongful arrests involving facial recognition where police failed to take a few basic investigative steps. I mean, in Detroit, there was the case of a woman who was pregnant and arrested because of a false facial recognition match. And it becomes then part of a very simple question of like, are people's due process being respected and honored? Our view is, for starters, that with technology, people deserve, like, technology should not replace whole systems of government or whole aspects of how the system operates, right? We should have very clear disclosure and accountability metrics. If someone is being charged due to some technology that was used to substantiate the application for complaint that a police officer has to file, the person who's being charged has a right to know that. And you're not always, I can tell you from my own experience from inside the DA's office, you don't always find that information makes it, because there's other ways to corroborate, that maybe there's a way where, for example, on location data, a police officer or police department uses a type of technology to ascertain the location of someone, but they use that information to then have a fishing expedition to bring a case that doesn't necessarily need to be substantiated on the technology, but it is still predicated. It's still part of the case that was brought. And so you find that departments, DAs, up and down the criminal justice system, there has been an incentive to use technology in novel ways without little accountability, little oversight. And these systems continue to be imbued with them, these biases, these social biases we have. And they then are finding themselves, now in this AI world, doing things like determining bail, sentencing, parole, really bringing the biases we have to a scale we haven't seen before.
Yeah, and I think there are layers to this. So, for example, we know that facial recognition systems don't work well on people of color, and so that creates misidentification. But even things as mundane as a license plate reader. I have a friend who's in the Bay Area in California, and a license plate reader did a false hit on his car, came up stolen, and he and his brother were pulled over at gunpoint by police officers. And yeah, eventually they kind of sorted it out. But, we know all the time that those kind of mistakes can lead to catastrophic incidents. It doesn't take much under those kinds of stress for there to be a shooting, or something worse, or even wrongful convictions and wrongful arrests, and each layer that you go through the criminal legal system, you're disrupting somebody's life a little bit more, and causing trauma to them too, which is not healthy.
No.
And so you think, oh, this technology is great, and I think if used properly with proper safeguards, that could be true. But without those safeguards in place, there's a lot of risk.
Not only is there a lot of risk, it's the burden on, as you just described, the burden on clearing oneself from that risk or from the trauma of it, it falls on the person who has been accused, right? There is no systemic way of saying, hey, this technology is being used in the case of, automatic license plate readers, ALPRs. There's no way to say, oh, hey, this technology is catching a lot of people who it should not be caught in this system, and creating default warrants where, someone may be issued a summons in a state that they don't live in, and may not even know to show up to this. So a warrant is issued, and they then get pulled over for a tail light or a headlight that's out, and suddenly find themselves at gunpoint. I mean, these are technology systems that are outsourcing whole functions of government, and it is unfortunately people's responsibility, not the state's responsibility. I mean, I say this by just the way it is, not the way it should be, but it's then their responsibility to try to clear their own name. When we think about, for example, just the number of false arrests fueled by AI, it's really impossible to know that because police and prosecutors rarely tell the public when they've ever used these tools. And there's only 7 states, but all but those 7 states, no laws explicitly require it to be disclosed as part of a criminal proceeding. There are so many instances I can even tell you where in some police departments, they are able to trial the use of particular technologies because there's no oversight, right? And so in the ways that you would hope. Some states have hundreds and hundreds of police departments who, with their own independent budgets, can say, oh, gee, I can go to this company because a town over is trying it. And this company, they'll let me trial their software for $9,999, which, mind you, is just below the threshold that they have to go before they have to report it out to the public and ask for public proposals for whatever the technology is, the surveillance system, the other tech they might use. And so because of that, the public doesn't always find out until it gets put into some sort of budgetary disclosure that there was this expenditure. And even then you would have to file a Freedom of Information Act request to find out more. It's really an uphill, it's pushing a boulder up a hill to try and understand how to hold prosecutors and police officers accountable for the use of this technology. In the Black Tech Agenda, at a baseline, the way we have designed it is trying to focus around common sense solutions that require legislative fixes. So, like we think that at a baseline, facial recognition use by law enforcement should be banned. Like we do not believe that this technology, which has been time and time again shown to have racially motivated bias, should be used in any capacity to support an arrest or any criminal complaint. And beyond that, AI systems, if they're used in the legal system, should have very, very strict prohibitions if they influence certain aspects of the justice system. So, we should not have them in places like predicting where police should go. In sort of in my world where I did criminal justice data work, we try to make it really clear, but sometimes the explanation falls flat, that criminal justice data, like policing data, is just where the police decided to go, right? And just respond to a criminal complaint. And so if you are training an AI based on that type of data, you're just amplifying where they've already been. You're not predicting crime. You're just predicting where they've already gone and made stops. So, we believe that there should be there, and there's not really an easy way to mitigate that at all, because, so many of the crimes that are tracked that occur are not tracked in the ways that data systems have been designed to collect data. Yeah, and so sorry, and I just think also around pretrial risk and sentencing risk, there needs to be very, very clear disclosures about where technology is being used, where AI is being used, where the decisions are being taken out of officers and into a black box, which cannot be held accountable in the courtroom.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. What was interesting is you kind of used the Sisyphusian analogy of pushing the boulder up the hill. I was kind of thinking more along the lines of the Aladdin analysis of letting the genie out of the bottle and then trying to get the genie back into the bottle. And, one thing that's really interesting to me about all of this is that we've kind of opened Pandora's box, to mix our metaphors again, in that, we have this technology, and, I'll be honest, like, I use AI every day, multiple times a day, and for simple things, it's really great. Like, you ask a question and it'll find the answer 9 times out of 10. I've noticed some error rate with it, but I mean, it's at its worst, it's like an improvement over Google. You can even get into debates with it, which is kind of fun sometimes. But the problem is that we're unleashing something that I'm not sure we know where it's going, and we already have problems in the system. There are already these inequities. You brought up, the predictive policing, and this is a problem with policing in general, right? They don't police every single crime. They go to certain neighborhoods and they have, an unwieldy presence in certain areas, and they catch those crimes. So, Black and
Right.
brown folks get arrested for drug offenses, 6, 7 times the rate of white folks, even though both sides are using the drugs about the same rate, according to most studies. And, you know, the continued use of this technology seems like it's going to only exacerbate this. It's not going to rectify it. So, how do you see your work kind of acting as a safeguard for some of this?
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I think at a fundamental level, and we see this throughout the democratic process. We see this throughout our political system. This belief in the objectivity of technology, right? Like we don't have spaces these days, in my opinion, where we can have difficult conversations about how we change people's lives meaningfully for the better. We disagree, and we go to our own little corners of the internet, and we find those who agree with us to back us up. And yet we have a need, as technology becomes more pervasive, as people do see good, legitimate uses in it, like you say, trying to learn more. I use it sometimes to help me ask better questions about what I should be looking and understanding about the world. If I don't know how to ask a question, about a topic, I use it to help me do that. But there's parts of using technology in a way that augments our lives, and then wholesale replacing parts of our lives. So, if we have been so lucky as to never been system involved, justice system involved, then we have never known what it's like to have new surveillance technologies put into our communities without the consent of our without our consent, right? And so, if I live in public housing and suddenly there's a camera that's like above my main doorway, and that is linked to some type of 24-hour feed in a fusion center run by the local regional police departments, what do they know about me? And what are they trying to learn about me? I think there's a whole host of issues that we have enabled in an Orwellian way that we do for convenience, when it actually just erodes public trust. So in our work, with the Black Tech Agenda and at Color of Change, we're fundamentally, in addition to just like restricting technology's use in certain domains, demanding that communities have control and oversight over those technologies in their neighborhood, right? So surveillance cameras, there's the technologies that are used in settings where they're called IMEI catchers. Are you familiar with those? Right. So they try to they're used in criminal investigations, but can be used to accidentally, and catch other people's information. When you're catching a wide net, you want to create review boards, community boards, where people in local jurisdictions, much larger than like a homeowners association, have the ability to see like, oh, okay, is there some type of device going up that we don't know of, that we've never heard of, that's being used by a police department, on our lampposts, and ultimately giving these communities the power to reject these systems if they choose, or if they don't. And ultimately that's what it's about, because we know that by giving so much power since the early 2000s, we have been giving more and more and more localized power to the surveillance state, to the police state, and that has not necessarily meaningfully made us better, but better, safer. Excuse me. What it has done is eroded our ability to make decisions about information about ourselves, and has policed Black and brown bodies more and more and more, even as seemingly crime rates are going down across the country.
Yeah, and you made the point. What do they know about me? And that's a frightening question, because part of the problem is that we don't know what they know about me, and we don't know what they have wrong about me. I was doing this story a couple of years ago, and this guy had gotten pulled over by the police, and they run the records and everything, and all of those records that they run are stored in a database that only the police have access to, and only law enforcement have access to, and so there are all these cases where they get things wrong. For this guy, it pulled up that he was on searchable probation, so they searched his car. They found a whole bunch of stuff that they shouldn't have found, and he was in jail fighting this case, trying to get all this stuff thrown out. Simple errors, because they hadn't updated their system, and the courts were not sympathetic toward it. They wouldn't throw out the search because they didn't want to. They're like, well, we found a whole bunch of stuff. Tough luck. And I'm laughing because of the absurdity of it, but it was a really tragic situation for this guy, because he got caught up in this web. But the reality is that it could be you and me, and we could be completely innocent guys. And the police could react to information that they have, or faulty information, or all of a sudden, there's an armed SWAT raid in the middle of the night, right? Like this is not a far-fetched thing. Like, this stuff happens.
No, it does happen.
Police raid people's houses in the middle of the night, and people get shot, killed, pets get killed, property gets destroyed over false information, and there really isn't a safeguard. So have to wrap up, but you can tell this is a very fascinating area for me. How can people learn more about this stuff? Because I feel like the first step in everything is, let's educate the public.
You're absolutely right, and it's a big part of our work right now with the Black Tech Agenda. And of course it covers justice issues, but it's certainly not limited to it. People can go to blacktechagenda.org or visit colorofchange.org and read the report. It's 40 pages and goes quite in detail to 7 different issue areas. Everything from how people are struggling with regards to their creative product, whether they're an artist, whether they are an actor being used as part of AI systems, to their information being used in policing systems. And, we try to give very concrete solutions. So, for example, talking about what you just said around their information being in a policing system, we really advocate for and believe in the right to delete personal data from law enforcement databases. If the circumstances allow it, you should be easily able to do that. And the same is true for corporations. If you have your information in a corporate database, and it's not necessary, or you need a minimum amount of it to access a service or a product, well, you should have a right to remove it. And ultimately, that's what our work is pointing towards, whether it's in the justice system or in big tech, people having the power to understand and change where their information is being used.
Well, we've been talking with Nasser Eledroos. He's with Color of Change and works on a project called Black Tech Agenda. It's very important, very today issues of surveillance and technology and AI and all the things that you read about. And this stuff really does affect people's personal lives and their civil rights and their civil liberties. So thanks, Nasser, for coming on.
Thank you so
this
much.
is Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next week for more tales from the injustice system.
Thank you to George Powell and Norman Mousequake Barrett for the use of our opening, Everyday Injustice. You can see more of George's music at www.justiceforgeorgepowell.com. That's Justice for George Powell, all one word, .com.